Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Peter Robinson, and today we've got Cooper, who is going to talk about decentralization and valuing invisible work. So this sounds like a really awesome talk and takes me back to in the early era of when I joined blockchain. There were lots and lots of people talking about this sort of thing, and it's really encouraging to see a new talk on the topic. So Cooper, why don't you introduce yourself and then, present your slides. Tell us all about it.
All right, thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I'll start sharing my slides. So, yeah, by way of introduction, my background is not really in the decentralized space. So my first degree was in architecture, and then I studied psychology. I then did a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. And through that process, I became fairly disillusioned with the academic system. I became convinced that there's better ways that we could be organizing. And so I joined what's known as the open science movement and founded a project called Free Our Knowledge. And this project was based on the assumption that we already have alternative platforms. We've had many different ways that we could organize information flow since the internet came about, but we're not actually using them as a collective. And so this first project was designed to get people to adopt these new platforms en masse through conditional pledges. But through that process, I realized that the cultural bind that academia is in is a lot deeper than I thought it was. And it actually requires a new model to disrupt the status quo. And so I started designing a new model based on the best examples out there. And at the end of my PhD, I decided that I'd make quicker progress by leaving academia and prototyping in another space. And so some community and I founded a project called Open Heart and Mind. And that's what we've been using as a vehicle for the last few years to prototype this model in the real world. And we've been doing that through hosting gatherings. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But yeah, what's interesting is like my analysis of academia translates to different sectors in society, because really we have the same kind of common problem occurring across sectors, whether it's science, the environment, decentralized movement, technology. Effectively, we have a collective action problem. And to solve this collective action problem, we need to recognize the full range of work that goes into any particular project or community. But the problem right now is that most systems only really reward the visible and measurable. So in academia, what gets recognized and rewarded is papers and journal publications. In technology, what gets recognized and rewarded is code commits and so on. But obviously, there's a lot more work that goes into a collective project or a community in the background that doesn't really get seen or recognized. And so this can include mentorship, curation, logistics. Feedback itself is really important. And all of these contributions tend to get ignored or undervalued through current systems. And what this means then is that those people that are bearing the brunt of the work tend to either burn out or get a bit power hungry and start gatekeeping. And it effectively excludes a large majority of the community from participating in this valuation process. And so, although I'm coming from a very different sector, I have been very interested in the decentralized movement for the last 5 or 6 years, because what I saw there is potential to try and solve this problem that we've been witnessing in the open science movement for the last few decades. And what's interesting is that what I've observed, at least, and I don't pretend to be an expert, I'm actually here to try and meet experts, connect and learn from all of you. But from my analysis, it seems that we have the same kinds of problems going on in the decentralized movement as we've been seeing in the open science movement for the last few decades. Because we can build all of the platforms that we want, but if we can't actually convince people to use them, then they are ineffective. They're not actually solving the centralization problem. They may be on the surface, but underneath, the culture is still very centralized. And so there's a recent preprint that I could point to by Sharma and colleagues, which shows that typically less than 10% of token holders are participating in governance decisions in DAOs. And so this means that it's still quite a centralized process. Often what happens when you have token voting is that whales control a large share of the tokens. And so if it's weighted according to token holdings, the whales get a disproportionate amount of sway. And then there's obviously delegated voting in a lot of DAOs as well. And this is a similar kind of concept where the power really gets centralized. And this is a response to the low participation rates. Basically, the theory goes that if participation is low, then it's best to have people who are well informed making those decisions and potentially recognize and reward them directly to incentivize their engagement. But what this points to in both open science, Web3, and other sectors like politics is that it's not really the code or the platform that is the bottleneck, but it's the culture that is the bottleneck. We need to figure out this incentive mechanism to get people to actually engage with systems. And if we can do that in a way that's super accessible and inclusive, then we can encourage more and more people to get involved and participate in the process. So what I believe we need is a system that can recognize all forms of contribution and can also work across different contexts. So it needs to be adaptable, not just to, say, finance or development, but across any type of community and any type of contribution set. And if it can recognize and reward diverse things like care, coordination, creativity, feedback, and allow the communities themselves to define what they actually find important, then we can create a valuation system that can then feed into automated rewards, reputation, and governance. And so in my analysis of the space, I've come up with 5 properties that I believe could become the seed properties for a virtuous cycle of value creation. So firstly, we need to incentivize engagement. And importantly, this is not just engagement in the contributions themselves, but this is engagement with the feedback process. So we need to directly be rewarding the evaluations themselves. Secondly, it needs to be super accessible so that everyone and anyone can engage with the system and have their say about what they find important. Thirdly, it needs to be fair because the psychology shows that people engage with systems that they feel are treating them fairly. Fourth, it needs to be adaptable to work across different cultures, contexts, and communities. And then finally, if the system were interoperable, it could allow multiple communities to coordinate their action at scale and achieve common goals together. So there's obviously a number of existing mechanisms out there, and I think I'd be failing if I didn't point to some of them. The projects that are listed on the right are all doing really great work and interesting solutions to this problem. But in my opinion, they don't solve all of these 5 properties together. And the 2 key ones are, firstly, that they're not interoperable at the mechanism level. So all of these projects have their own rules and incentives and assumptions at play. And it means that they're not interoperable at a higher level across different projects that might be implementing the same kind of mechanism, but in a different way. And then secondly, the really key limitation is that they don't incentivize high quality evaluations themselves. So what this requires is some kind of a self-referential feedback loop, because if we're building an evaluation system that wants to evaluate evaluations, then it needs to be applied to itself. And so there are some exceptions to this. So for example, in the table I've shown below, algorithmic distribution and prediction markets both do have incentives for evaluations. So for example, Research Hub is a great example that offers tokens for people that do reviews of papers. But typically these mechanisms don't allow for quality differences within the evaluations themselves. And then prediction markets is another example where you get rewarded if you make a good bet on a particular outcome. But it's a fairly limited scope because it can only really apply to situations where you've got a directly observable outcome and is not so good at valuing more abstract things like ideas or even just the value of a code commit. And so this brings us to Metavaluation. This is both a mechanism and a framework that we've been developing at OM for the last few years. And the mechanism itself is based on pairwise comparisons. And this is key because pairwise comparisons are really, really simple and they're highly adaptable. So you can put any 2 contributions in front of somebody and ask them to tell you which is more valuable on some dimension. And they can fairly easily do that task. We know from the research and the science that this reduces the problem space and it makes it easier for the person to do this kind of analysis. And it's a really, really simple interface that anybody can interact with. Now, the part where Metavaluation gets its name from is that we then turn this mechanism back on itself. So this is now valuing valuations. And so you can consider this as a meta-valuation. And in this example, you're comparing some regular contribution, like a piece of code, to some number of these pairwise valuations. And so in this example, in the orange box, you can see we're asking somebody to consider the value of 100 of these pairwise valuations and then compare that to the value of this piece of code. And critically, because these pairwise valuations are fairly standard, we can treat them as a standard unit of value to the community. And then we can use some fairly simple math that I'll show you in a minute to calculate a relative valuation for every single contribution that goes through this system. And it can be done in a completely decentralized and autonomous way. So as I said, Metavaluation is also a circular framework. And so the idea is that a community can iterate through this process and just keep iterating and improving and refining the system as they go. So the first stage is to record the set of contributions. These can be anything that community think is valuable, so ideas, resources, and actions. And they should also decide what dimensions they want to rate those contributions on. Now, secondly is the review mechanisms. I just walked you through that, the review and the meta review. And this gives rise to the recognition metrics, which are these multi-dimensional scores where each unit is pegged to the value of a single review. Then once we've got recognition scores for each contribution, we can calculate rewards. These might be financial, or they might be governance rewards, for example, reputation metrics that allow people certain privileges. And then we can begin to respect and give platforms to those people who are providing value to the community over time. And then finally, because this entire system is made open and available to the community, they can conduct research, they can reflect on what worked and what didn't, and they can improve that framework and that iteration for the next run around. So this is the process that we've been testing for the last few years at Open Heart and Mind. We've done this across a number of spreadsheet prototypes, which are above the line here. And these were conducted across our own gatherings in Southeast Queensland region, as well as open science conferences, Web3 projects, workshops, and residencies. And then more recently, one of our developers has built a working prototype. And so this is what's shown below the line. We've now started going back through our record of contributions and valuing some of those contributions, and also running these really rapid prototypes with other communities. So we've done this with a Burning Man organization, a permaculture community, and then in the last week, we've done a research software conference and also a music festival. And what all of these prototypes show is that the same framework can apply to very, very different contexts and very different types of contributions with different value sets at play. And so I'm just going to zoom in quickly to one of our more recent prototypes. So this is an online research software conference that was hosted last week. We used the app during a 1-hour workshop to recognize and reward contributions to the conference itself. And so we had 19 people participate. We nominated 18 contributions and completed 1,260 reviews. And on the right is the result of that process, where you can see this multi-dimensional template that shows the 18 contributions and how they scored on each of the 3 dimensions that we measured. I'm also going to give you just a quick window of the results in the app itself. So here's the instance. Here's what the prototype outputs. It's got a quick summary of what was completed. And then here you can see the raw data. So this tab, reviews, shows all of the pairwise comparisons that people made. So simply somebody is shown a particular dimension, like value to the community. They're shown 2 contributions, like writing this developer's guide or emailing sponsors. And then they're asked to pick one of those 2 contributions. And we do this across the entire set of contributions. So everything's compared to everything else. And that's done both forwards and backwards. So A versus B, and then in reverse order, B versus A. And then we also do these meta reviews. So here you can see an example where somebody is asked to compare value to the mission, and they're asked to compare somebody who organized the leaders forum versus 300 of these reviews. And so this was actually me that did this review, and I picked the leaders forum because it was many hours of work. And then collectively, basically what the system does is adds up these scores, these votes that each contribution received. And so you get these tallies for each contribution on each dimension. And critically, you also get these tallies for the meta review contributions. And it's these that are then used to normalize the scores for all the other contributions. So this is done through a very simple algorithm. The red triangles are the review contributions, and the blue line is a function that's fit. We then use that function to interpolate the scores for all the regular contributions, and those are shown in the green dots. And here's that plot that I showed you in the slide before. And so then the last stage is where you can start moving to reward mechanisms, because then you can tally up these scores across each person's contributions. And so if you select by a particular dimension, you can see that Rowland scored well above everybody across his 8 contributions. And obviously this is just a small representative sample, but if this were expanded to include all contributions to that conference, it would give a relatively accurate measure of the amount of value that each person has added. And so that's the extent of what our app can do right now. It basically takes you from the record to the recognize phase of the framework. Just as a proof of concept, overnight at the conference, I created this spreadsheet that looked at what kind of reputation metrics we could develop. So here's some plots showing the total reviews that people did, the value that they added to each category that we'd tag the data with, and then also critically, the reliability of reviewers, because often a question is, what happens if somebody tries to game the system? What if they just click buttons to try and get rewards? Well, they would certainly initially get rewarded for 1 point with every click that they make, but fairly quickly we would learn that they're operating at chance, like this person was, and we could then modulate their rewards so that in the future, they might only be rewarded a fraction of 1 unit for each review that they complete. Or alternatively, if we find out that somebody's really reliable and accurate, then perhaps we could start rewarding them more to incentivize that kind of high quality review. So this is an example of a really rapid experiment that we ran. Like I said, the first experiment was run in the space of an hour-long workshop on the first day, and then I presented that to the broader conference the next day in a talk. And so this is showing how quickly we can collect data with this new app and iterate the system as we go. And the idea is that we can just keep iterating and evolving the system over time. So at OM, we have a particular set of contributions that make sense for us, but obviously that doesn't apply to every community. So they can start iterating and evolving the framework in ways that suit them. And critically, if multiple communities adopt the same dimension, this creates pathways for them to start recognizing and rewarding the value that they each create and offer to one another. And so what this creates then is a higher level value space, which includes things like money, but is not defined by it. And so the dimensions in this higher value space are things like gratitude or value to the mission or value to the community, whatever dimensions those communities think are important. And any communities that are adopting the same dimensions now have a pathway where they can start to allow that value to flow and be recognized across and between communities. So that's the basic research and development. If there's interest, we can run a participatory experiment now using the actual app. And then the final part of the talk will be just going through next steps. So what we have in store for the plan. So I guess I can pause there and potentially ask if there's any questions and also explore whether we're interested in running a little experiment in-house.
Yeah, are there any questions? Let's start off with that.
I have one. So, love your work. This is very cool stuff. And very necessary. The thing that jumps out to the old jaded cybersecurity guy is that I spent a lot of my career around the open internet and the free software movement. And we've seen things like email, for example, where, it started off and certain assumptions were made because you had a trusting and cooperative community. And when you have a trusting and cooperative community, you run your trial of your software, you iterate it, you put it into production, and things work pretty well. And we've seen this in more modern systems than email, right? And possibly one of the things that differentiates most of the systems from, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin is the assumptions, the trust assumptions on Ethereum or Bitcoin, were really strong on those systems. And in most systems, they're pretty weak. Most systems assume that if you trial something in a trusting and cooperative community, then you're good. And then you throw it up on the internet. It turns out that there are ways to game the system. And the way to game this system, it seems to me, would be a Lance Armstrong-like collusion, like in the Tour de France, where he had a team of people behind him who were all working to make him succeed. And it was the collusion that was as important as the drug cheat, right, or the transfusions, or what have you. And so that kind of multi aspect, fairly sophisticated type of collusion allowed him to get away with it for years and years, and win a major international competition in spite of the fact that he was cheating to get there. So I would imagine that type of collusion, you put a team together and you go around conference to conference and put up somebody different each time. You win whatever awards there are to be won, and you rinse and repeat. And so this is it seems to be gameable in that regard. And I wonder if you've given any thought to the mitigations for those kinds of attacks.
Yeah, great question and great point. It is gameable. Any game is gameable. It's Goodhart's law that as soon as something becomes a metric, it will be targeted and gamed. My background, as I said, is in academia, where we've had basically the same metrics for the last 50 years. We've been operating journal impact factors and citations as being the gold standard of,
right.
Even though they're not actually a measure of quality and never intended to. And the reason
I've been in and out of academia, and I understand this. Yeah.
And it's a big problem because they are incredibly gameable. People do game them right now. The problem is that they've been the same metrics for 50 years. And so people have developed very sophisticated strategies, entire careers around gaming these metrics.
Right.
And so my response is that if we have dynamic metrics that can respond and update to attempts to game, then certainly, yes, there will be attacks. That's inevitable. We have to accept that people will attack the system. They will try and achieve short-term gains out of it, and they will extract value. It's inevitable. But the rest of us that are interested in just getting along and developing a system that recognizes value fairly can do our best to correct for those incursions and improve the system to respond more effectively next time. So the response, I believe, is that if the system is able to adapt and evolve, and particularly if those actions that people take to respond to attacks are recognized and rewarded, then people will also be incentivized to do that work. And again, I guess I can contrast to the current situations in academia where there are people called data sleuths who go around and check papers and they test the data.
Yeah, for p-hacking or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but right now it's not only not rewarded, it's actually it's disincentivized because there's all kinds of legal attacks and risks and public scrutiny that these people go under. So it's the exact opposite of what it should be. Like, these people should be recognized and rewarded for the work they're doing, but the system doesn't encourage that. So,
well, I think that those people came to light late enough in the process that the people running the universities right now won that game by playing those rules, and they may feel that they don't have an incentive personally to encourage a lot of uncovering of other careers. It's there may be a little self-serving or self-healing there. I'm wondering if a model that might not work is to look at the history of the way that Wikipedia community unfolded, because they started off, allowing both anonymous and authenticated edits, and they still allow that even today, right? But they have found over the course of their work that they have to have a lot of monitoring tools for controversial pages in Wikipedia. They've put in place multi levels of editors and moderators across different communities with experts. And the way that the Wikipedia community has grown to accept both the degree of spam and graffiti and both incentivized and unincentivized, hacking of the system might be instructive in this regard.
Yeah, definitely. I see this as a kind of additional layer that could be applied to that kind of a system. Like there's many information systems, and some of them have review processes built in, like academia or Wikipedia. But in my opinion, most of those are flawed in some way. So academia, I've been through some of the limitations. My very limited understanding of Wikipedia is that the community is still relatively homogenous. So it's not inclusive to all peoples around the world, and could potentially be opened up a little bit more to allow more people to participate in that process. But the what I think it also lacks potentially is transparency. Like when I go into a Wikipedia page, it would be fantastic to see who has made what edits, what their reputation is like, and whether I can really trust that person. Because right now I just page.
I think you can see all that if you
You can.
there are buttons you can press on and you can see who wrote what word and the actual whole history of the page, and even go down into, can have discussions. So it's like having a pull request in a GitHub repository where you say, here's a proposed change. And then there can be like a multi-month huge discussion, and it's all very open who said what. And, I guess everyone's got to, like justify their actions and all that sort of thing. So I think GitHub, it's very open, but it's also a matter of knowing how to do it. The thing I've recently been looking at junk science and fake science. And so there's a family in Turkey who run WASAT, and WASAT, or maybe it's WASAT. Anyway, they run fake science conferences all over the world. And for that matter, there's IEEE ICBC is coming up in Brisbane. So it's an international crypto conference next year. And so I was looking for it. I came up against ICBC, and actually there were multiple of them. And then I realized it was a WASAT. So then I watched videos and learned more. And so the idea is that, say if you're big tobacco, or you're an anti-vaxxer, or you've got, like some dodgy science that, isn't going to stand up in a real, say, medical journal, what you do is you publish it in a fake science journal or in a fake science conference. And yeah, so when I look at, similar to David's question, I look at like this, and, you can imagine, say, big tobacco. I think we can all, or hopefully we can all agree that, that's tobacco is bad for your health. And so assuming we agree on that, then you say, well, could they orchestrate to have enough people give each other great reviews in a system like you're proposing to essentially game the system? Or say, or people like, I think Trump said, Panadol's bad for pregnant women, and it's just like no basis whatever in science. So, but could you, like game the system to have people who appear to be credentialed say that sort of stuff? And I mean, endorse each other. I mean, that'd be that's, I guess, a concern I've got. And I don't know if there's anything, like beyond what you've already said, though. I mean, you just got to have gatekeepers who are going to say that's garbage or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so the general model that we're intending to explore it on is that if we can solve this problem of recognizing value first and foremost, then we can track value over time, and we can track value according to different categories and sectors. And this can give a window of expertise and trustability over time. So if we have people in our community that have demonstrated value over many years, then presumably they're also to some degree trustworthy, and we can also start to explore metrics around trustworthiness as well. Now, obviously, people are a member of many communities. Like I'm a member of Amos, where we prototyped. I'm a member of some of these other communities where we prototyped. And so there's crossover between different communities. And so if you're starting to see that there's certain nodes that are connecting these different communities, and there's a certain degree of trust across these different communities, then you could start to develop that kind of like a network graph that shows where the trustability is within and across communities. And what you describe is certainly possible. Like somebody else, this is an open framework. Anybody can take it and use it in the way that they want. They could build their own system. They could, develop their own way of doing meta valuation in whatever platform that makes sense to them. and they could put it forward and say, hey, look, we are super trustworthy, look at us and collaborate with us. But we at OM, if we have absolutely no connection, no crossover, no reason to trust them, then we're obviously going to be very cautious about sharing all of our data transparently, exposing ourselves to risk, to a community that doesn't have a lot of transparency or crossover with us. And then more so, if we do detect that there's some kind of questionable activity going on with one particular community, well, we can then share that information with communities that we do trust and we are friendly with. So we can form a network of communities that we feel are relatively trustworthy. We can share information about other communities that we don't think we trust, and then slowly but cautiously expand that network of trust out. But it's a giant experiment, and I don't have all the answers right now. I think what we do have is a really neat seed that could grow into something useful, but it's going to take a lot of work. And this is why this is a call out to people that are interested in this to help us build it, because we don't have all the answers and we need to figure out how all of this works, and particularly need to figure out how it works with decentralized technologies, because I, like yourselves, believe that's the future.
Yeah.
So I have one more question, if I may.
Yes.
This may or may not be correct because I haven't seen your system in detail, but it seems to me that you either positively vote for someone or you don't, right? Meaning that you don't denigrate someone, right? You can give a thumbs up, but you can't give a thumbs down. Is that right?
At this stage, yes.
Yeah. And the reason I ask about that is there are cases where you might want to recognize people carefully. So, for example, I might show up at one of your conferences and, set up all the chairs, organize all the speakers, do all the mailings. I do a big contribution. I get a bunch of upvotes. But then on the weekend, I organize an event for, I don't know, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, and Jeffrey Epstein. Right? And someone in that community of communities might say, hey, wait a minute, right? This guy might be contributory in one context, but he's not somebody we want to invite to dinner. We're not somebody we want to give rewards to, right? And so it would seem to me, just people being people, you would have to have some mechanism to handle that case.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially the Rolf Harris, great painter, but yeah.
Yeah, dodgy bloke, but great painter, right? Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
So the reason I'm poking on these kind of edge cases is because, you've got a career studying the human mind and all of the crazy stuff that it can get up to, right? And when people are involved, I think one of the lessons of the internet as it's played out over the last half century and the web over the last 35, is that we really need to take these kind of things into account early in the process. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I said we're not negatively valuing things yet, because that is the intention. Value is both positive and negative. And if we have a North Star, which is, say, value to the OM mission, then there are steps that can take us towards there, or there are steps that can take us away from there. And so in theory, the model can also account for value extractions from a common goal. And so within a community, those kinds of negative behaviors could be accounted for, and they could be given a negative score that could come off somebody's total. And it might be that somebody's added enough value that they slipped up and made a mistake, but the community go, well, look, it was relatively small compared to all the value you've added. Or it might be that
I don't know how you naively implement something like this without implementing cancel culture with its downsides.
Yeah, but the way I imagine it could play out is, let's say somebody comes to a community and they do extract value. That could be measured by the community, and they could end up with a negative score. but they could also still be a possibility. They don't need to necessarily be completely cancelled. We could show them the damage that they've created. We could also show them the work that it took for our community to correct that and update the system to protect against that attack again. And we could hand them a bill that says, here's all of the harm you've caused. If you feel like playing this game with us again, you need to make up for this and then some. And that would then, it wouldn't be a cancel culture where you're permanently out. It would be an opportunity for somebody to actually repent and make good on the harm that they've caused. And potentially, if they do all of that and the community agree that they've done enough, then potentially they could start playing the game again.
Yeah,
and then,
repent is an interesting word, because I can't help hearing that without thinking there's a certain cultural overlay on the system. And I'm not criticizing it. You're probably right. I actually agreed with what you said, but you can imagine having cultural friction because you play it out into different communities, especially highly international communities.
Well, I mean, and you think people are multidimensional and you know, like, so, you know, like,
and have multiple personae and all the rest.
Yeah. So you could be very highly regarded by one group of people, and for that matter, you could be very highly regarded in one sense. Like, but then, you know, like, all right, the person who developed the MMR vaccine, you know, there are a whole stack of people who would hire them in great regard because, you know, they've saved bazillions of lives. There are whole other people who say, oh, look, you know, we've read this paper and it says it gives you autism or something. So, you know, you're evil, you're a child killer or whatever. You know, so you've got someone who different people have very different thoughts on. And yeah, I mean, but yes, and then you've got different parts of your life as well, which you are different. Yeah, hence you could have different regard.
Yeah,
I mean, it'd be fascinating to apply your system to Davos, the IPCC, and a Trump rally, and then compare the way those radically contradictory communities interact with the system. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
it would be, yeah, very interesting.
What?
I mean, sorry, yeah, go on, Peter. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I'm not sure if you would have seen last fortnight's talk, but it was by a crowd from Gnosis, and they have created something called Circles. And it's a mechanism for understanding and other people and like connecting other people, and it's also a universal basic income thing as well. But there are a lot of interesting aspects to it that mean that you can have clusters of people that are connected, and you can be essentially people vouch for each other. And so it's I wonder whether your framework that you've got could somehow or other leverage the network that gets created within Circles, because it's a way of, you know, they're hoping to obviously have 7 billion people all get involved in Circles and, you know, be able to do stuff. But even when it's, you know, not at that scale, just the idea that you've got a decentralized system of referential integrity, you know, and it prevents Sybils as well, you know, which is obviously one of the possible problems with your system. And it sort of roots them out because you essentially no one's going to, I mean, just by the way that Circles work, you don't accept money from a Sybil, which is an interesting thing. So hence you probably wouldn't trust votes from a Sybil either if somehow or other the two could be integrated. But anyway.
I'm going to make a wild guess that Circles is going to fall short of 7 billion users.
Oh yeah,
but
they're only 10,000 at the moment.
Yeah, and 10,000 is still quite an accomplishment, right? And I think my comment, Peter, about Circles was I wasn't sure what their critical mass needs to be. And I wanted to ask you because you'd proposed a participatory example here, an experiment. And I think there aren't enough of us on the call to necessarily make that work super well. But I'm curious what you think your critical mass is for this to work well.
I don't know if there is a critical mass. Like my first project that I introduced at the very beginning was based on that idea of a critical mass. Like, you need a certain amount of value to transfer to new systems for that system to be useful. Personally, I think this system is useful out of the gate. Like, I think it's useful. I think there's even value in me just using it myself. So that would be N of 1. But we've run little experiments where there's 3 people collaborating on a very small, grant writing application, and it still allows us to gain some clarity around the magnitude of contributions towards that. And it also means that little sub-example could then be couched within a broader project if we start valuing all those broader contributions as well. So I'm not sure that this mechanism actually has a kind of minimum critical mass for it to be useful.
Well,
but
we'll see. Now I want you to have a seminal paper score for an N=1 study, because that would amuse me.
yeah, I mean, the way I think that might be useful is just gaining introspection on what is a good use of my time. So like this mechanism could also be coupled with feedback about well-being and happiness and ongoing states. And so if I was tracking my daily activities and I was measuring them with respect to, say, my happiness, then it might be a window into how to live my life, for example. So there might be a paper at some point in the future, but the current paper is one of our academic conferences, and that had around 20 or so people contributing to measuring the value of the conference.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, cool.
Various use cases.
Yeah, very cool.
It'd be really interesting if you could get a university course, say, I don't know, say for instance, say an IT course where they've got a lot of group projects, and you get like 100 people who are doing the course, say 20 groups of 5 or something, and get them all to use the framework and to self-reflect on, who contributed, to the project and how interested are we? Because often those sorts of group projects do have that sort of self-assessment afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think
it would really help you with grading on those things, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it could potentially like automate the grading process. People could start doing the grading themselves and take a lot of that burden off the teachers from doing it all, potentially.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I know when I did my MBA, there was a subject that I did, and we all had to do this self-assessment. And I do feel that the rest of the team that I worked with ganged up on me and said I did a crap job, which I was startled with at the end, because I think they all got 7s and I got a 5. And it was like, what? How did this happen? Because we did a stellar job, but obviously they all...
Because there are people involved.
Wow, yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess it would give more transparency. I would have had real feedback maybe on what everyone thought I didn't do or did do or whatever.
I've used student assessments in a course teaching computer networking to help guide grades, and had automated it. And it was a different system to yours, and it was much more simple. But one of the things I told the students in advance was, this is a computer science course, so if you hack the system, you actually should get better score, right? It's okay.
Yeah, that's a similar philosophy to this framework, in that at this stage, if you game the system, gaming the system looks like doing lots of reviews, because you get a point for every review. But that's actually good. Right now, we need data. We need a lot of data to try and figure out of this. So when the gaming is in line with the collective goal, it's fine. And it just needs to be able to be adjusted and updated over the time. So it's a similar kind of idea.
Okay, are you connected with many university lecturers, say at our local universities here in Queensland? Because if not, David and I certainly are, and we could hook you up with various people who, like, I know of one person who's got a class of 700 people. I'm not sure if they do group projects or not, but if so, that'd be an awesome, study group. I'm not sure if they'd take it on, but they might.
Yeah, would love any connections with people that are interested in collaborating. We have some collaborators at QUT, like through one of our studies, the AMOS study. But yeah, particularly like that kind of a study would be huge, I think, to have that kind of a population size.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's do that. I'll send you a few messages. I'm going to get you onto Circles too afterwards. I'll send you the links for that, and we can. I'll be very interested to see what your thought on that project is, and to see if after you've been involved for a week or two, whether you think there is any correlation with what you're doing or not. I mean, there may not be. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, my understanding is that it's a gift circle. I kind of rushed through the existing mechanisms in the early slide. But like gifting circles to me are still an individual valuation mechanism. So people can decide to give a certain number of tokens based on the value that they perceive it to be. Whereas the mechanism we're developing is more of a collective valuation mechanism. So it's not really up to one person to decide, except in that N of one case. But yeah, like when it's more than one person, it's up to the collective to decide what things are worth. So I'd say that's the kind of key difference. But I would certainly be interested in exploring ways that we could kind
I
of
think,
leverage.
yes, you can have groups within there. And I think you can have some DAOs deciding on how the group allocation works. So essentially, you could be a member of a group and allocate 10% of your, like circles that you get each day to the group. And I wonder if then the DAO could, which could then be informed by your technology, could then say, oh, well, this person's done this, and hence they should get this many circles or something.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, would love to
yeah,
explore that.
yeah. I've
Cool.
no idea
Have you read that book?
how to.
I've read parts of it.
Yeah,
Not
I'm just wondering if, yeah, we've had enough experience with DAOs over the past almost decade that we've begun to figure out what some of the failure conditions are, like where DAOs don't work, where they fail. And by far the most common failure case for a DAO is when the community becomes deadlocked. It needs a vote to be taken to progress and or to fix itself or to recover from a situation, whatever, and it can't get enough people voting. So it's participant apathy is the most common failure condition. And so I spent a little bit of time working on systems to and mechanisms to recover DAOs, when they're in that failure case, various legal and social and technical fallbacks. And yeah, I'm kind of wondering if some of the DAOs wouldn't be interesting applications for this kind of approach, because you'd have a way of allocating tokens based on participation, and by rewarding certain kinds of good activities, whatever good is defined at within the confines of that particular DAO, you might end up having enough weight in the community to participate in some of these fallbacks in the case where the DAO can't get consensus on something. So there are interesting things that one might do where the reward or contributions doesn't come into play until you're in extremis, and then it helps the organization get out of a hole, right? And because that's such a common phenomenon within DAOs, that might be a really super interesting thing to explore, or paper to write, or thing to trial, or whatever. And if that sounds of interest to you, please hit me up on LinkedIn and let's have a chat about it.
Yeah, very much, David. Yeah, thank you. And that kind of feeds into the last few slides, which is basically an invitation to collaborate. If I could perhaps share, because I know we're sort of running out of time.
Yeah, please do.
So yeah, I'll skip to that slide, which is basically an open invitation for collaborations. I do see potential use in DAOs. Like, this is why the mechanism was designed in the first place, to support DAOs, particularly in science. But now I see it as a general mechanism that any DAO could potentially explore. or even just projects and communities. Like currently we're not in Web3. We've built this Web2 prototype. We're currently building Web2 MVP, but our intention is to integrate that with Web3 over time. So we're basically looking for support at all levels and collaborations at all levels. So if people are interested in this mechanism, would like to apply it to their own project or their own community, or have skills to help us with development or potentially finding funding, we need support. So we have a diverse team from around Australia, particularly really need front-end support. And also, yeah, we don't have a lot of Web3 expertise in-house. And so if anybody out there is interested in supporting this idea, we certainly need help with it. And I also just wanted to give a shout out that our next big experiment is already underway. So at the end of November, for anybody that's based locally in Queensland, Australia, we're hosting what you might think of as a decentralized autonomous gathering. So this will be a gathering where there's no tickets, no hierarchy, no hidden decisions. Basically, anybody can offer any kind of a gift, whether that's money, workshops, goods, or services. And then we openly review these contributions via Wisdom. And critically, the reviews also get rewarded. And so everybody who offers a fair share to the community gets invited. So there's nobody deciding what things are worth. We're all collectively deciding what offerings are worth. And then everybody who is kind of playing the game fairly gets invited to co-create. So if people are interested, the link for our Substack is there, and that's got all of the details on how to apply. And then, yeah, like just returning to this idea of Web3 integration, like part of the last year, I've been traveling around and sharing with various decentralized communities and just showing that it also works for decentralized projects and potentially DAOs. But there's obviously many, many ways we could implement this, and it's not my area of expertise. So I'm super keen to hear from people that have ideas about how this might be implemented, either, for example, smart contracts, Ethereum attestation service, or potentially even a new blockchain. So that's my closing slide, and just to thank everybody who's been involved, because this has been a multi-community journey over the last few years. And so I really want to thank everybody who's helped nudge this idea forward. And if you're interested, our link tree is there. You can scan the QR code and find ways to connect and support us. So thank you, and thank you, Peter, for organizing this meeting. You're on mute.
I am on mute and I'm struggling to find my mouse. Problems of having two screens. Look, thank you for your talk. That's really interesting. And I think we've asked you a lot of questions. And in fact, the solution could be actually, could you bring up the slides again and, the last slides we had? Because there's something interesting coming up that I think you should attend. Yeah.
I'm not sure that's the right one.
Yeah. Or I can probably bring them up myself if I try hard.
Was it this one you're after?
Yeah, and then the slide after that, which is the and after that, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, there. Yeah, future talks. So in 3 weeks' time, on October the 15th, will be October the 14th, if you're in Americas, we're having a Web3 blockchain recruitment event. So your organization, I know you're not going to be wanting to pay for people, but you are trying to recruit Web3 people to help you. And so I reckon it would be really good if you were to come along to that event as I don't know whether we could, anyway, well, you're in the employer bucket, even though, you're going to be having contributions rather than paid employment or anything. And I know there are a lot of people who are interested in doing something in the Web3 space. And so I think that that would be a very good way of helping recruit people into your project.
That's a great,
yeah.
Thank you.
And so in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be talking about EIP 7702. So that's been a delayed talk, and I am going to do it this time. James Burney's going to talk about real-world assets in late October. There is a talk or two coming in for November. They just haven't been finalized yet. And then in the December 10, the meetup will be 8 years Yeah, so the initial conversations we had at ThoughtWorks were about 8 years ago in December. And so that will be awesome to have that talk and reflect on how blockchain, Ethereum, and the meetup have evolved over 8 years, which is a long time in anyone's money. Yeah, so anyway, everyone knows the following the slides after this about how if you're watching this on YouTube, then you can turn up to the meetup. If you're here today, watch it on this talk on YouTube. There is a Slack workspace, and sometimes there is example code. There will be next fortnight. So that's good. All right, you can unshare again, Cooper. So look, thank you very much. This has actually been a really invigorating talk. And I look forward to seeing where this technology goes. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Peter.
very interesting, Cooper. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great questions, great conversation. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, talk later. Bye-bye.